Hello and welcome to Not Complain Enough. I am your podcast host, Carista, and this is episode 13. And today we are getting really saucy about women and how women cut each other down, essentially. Um, I have found a new hero. I came across this wonderful lady by the name of Cindy Gallo, who runs a company called Make Love Not Porn. And in deep diving into a lot of her interviews that she's done. And I'll link the initial podcast that I heard her interview on, which was black t-shirts. So I'll link that in the notes. But just the perspective from Cindy was incredible. She calls it how she sees it. And, if you've been listening for a while, that's kind of the vibe here too, is, it's all about the truth bombs and calling it how you see it, right? And so she does that, but in the advertising world. And the fascinating thing is she she posted a thing the other day on LinkedIn, which I emphatically agree with. So she posted a thing because everyone's available for International Women's Day talks and all this sort of thing now, because that's obviously coming up next month. And she wrote a very, honest and open post saying, if you're going to invite me along to these International Women's Day talks, don't expect me to come for free and don't give me some tokenistic kind of gesture. Pay me what I'm worth. Otherwise, I'm not doing your International Women's Day talk, which is entirely fair. And the funniest thing is that I guess ironic thing is that this year's theme around International Women's Day is hashtag equality. So yeah, I mean, it's just ironic that these big companies think that they can get away with asking women to come along and speak for free because it's exposure and it's, International Women's Day and do your part. Like, yeah, how does fuck off sound? And actually pay people for the, what they bring. And these incredible people that share their knowledge and their wisdom, and they can really draw a crowd. And you're basically treating them like a second class citizen by not even giving them a meaningful gesture of paying them to come along to these things, which makes you as a company look good. Like, it's just tokenistic and it's bullshit. So yeah, but like going into kind of International Women's Day and women in general, I've had lots of discussions in the last few weeks and actually over the last, couple of decades working in corporate environments. And, women are and, quoting Cindy again in the podcast episode that I listened to about how she was talking about how women are over mentored and under championed. And that's just so on point because women are over mentored. There's all these women's mentor programs and all this sort of thing. But when it comes down to it, the bullying and the really awful behavior that I have personally experienced, and I know many other women have experienced this, has been at the hands of other women. And I don't say that lightly because I know that women have, obviously had adverse experiences with men, and that happens too. And, I'm not going to say that I haven't had that sort of experience because I have. But in saying that, the experiences that were actually worse than the kind of, sexual innuendos and things from men were actually the women that were direct managers to me generally, or yeah, just working with a particular age range of women. And I don't say that lightly either because I feel like a lot of these women that get to these middle management positions or sometimes at this executive level are either really insecure in where they are or they see these younger women, doing really well and coming up the ranks, and instead of actually helping them and being like giving them meaningful support, what they tend to do is undermine them and steal their ideas and use them as their own. Or, there's a lot of this smiling to your face and then back channeling behind you, to undermine your reputation, to undermine what you do, all of those sorts of things. And it's actually, I think, so much more damaging when it comes from another woman who's doing it to you, because we've been sold this like lie of, oh, women help each other out, and, like there's the rhetoric around sisterhood and all the rest of it. And actually, women are cruel. They're awful. I've witnessed and, had experiences where older women have, just been cruel, incredibly cruel. And I've seen it happen to fellow colleagues. These women, a lot of them have been in these organizations for an incredibly long period of time. They attract the same type of person usually into their teams. And so those types of, if you're not that particular type of person, so, if you don't want to take part in all the gossip, and you don't want to be part of a lot of the things that, they want to do, then you're ostracized, you're targeted. And the targeting happens in such a way that is hard to articulate, and it's really hard to pinpoint, because it's almost like living with an abusive partner. And I don't say that lightly either, because I have been in that experience and I know what that's like. And, you go to these workplaces hoping that people will change. And you go into these workplaces thinking that you will be safe. When in actual fact, just, I don't know, the amount of stories that I've heard and experienced and witnessed, so much of this really bad behavior is at the hands of other women to other women. And that really needs to stop. Like, we really need to check ourselves, because you can't be pointing the finger and being like, oh, it's all men. Men are the problem. They need to be helping us and we need equality here and all the rest of it. And I'm not suggesting that that's not the case, because, of course, these discussions are incredibly nuanced. But what we do need to look at is the fact that no one really speaks out about this. No one speaks out about the fact that women are actually more cruel to each other than what a lot of men can be to women, in terms of like power dynamics and things like that. I mean, where we know the narrative of, the executive boss that's, hooking up with the younger woman at work and all that sort of thing. I mean, that narrative and those stories are very well documented, and they've been uncovered through Me Too movements and things like that. But what we're not getting to is the fact that so much of the corrosive nature of a lot of these organizations, and they wonder why they can't shift their culture, is because you have these groups of women that are awful to other women. And when I say it's usually a certain age of women to younger women, that is a generalization, because I have seen it work the other way, where there's been like a middle management that has targeted, you know, elder employees, women who are at the point where they're looking to retire and things like that. And they're just, they're happy to do their part-time hours and whatever. And instead of honoring that boundary and honoring those wishes, these organizations try and coerce them into doing more work and doing things to suit them, as opposed to honoring their line in the sand and being like, okay, well, I'm a few years off retiring. I've got grandkids or whatever. Like, I don't want to be working every single day of the week. Like, I want to look after my grandkids and spend some time with them. And I'll also work a couple of days a week. And I've seen that be encroached so much through organizations that, like, they just don't really honor those boundaries. And also, instead of actually really having proper, I don't want to say plans, but like realistic ideas of workloads and things like that. When there are more realistic ideas of workloads, then you're actually able to distribute that in a much better way. And you don't need these people to be doing extra days and extra time and stuff like that. And I think, particularly with a lot of the layoffs that we're seeing in the tech space and a lot of companies, particularly like hospitality and in the industry of, in the building industry and, all that sort of thing, all these, like, so many companies are finding it hard to find staff. And part of the reason, I feel, is because a lot of these companies haven't focused on really meaningfully, instead of just fucking ticking the box, but actually trying to change a culture and actually, instead of just using words and ticking boxes and being like, yeah, but we're doing that, actually just fucking getting in there and doing it. And, like my newfound hero, Cindy says about diversity, she's like, instead of talking about diversity, just be fucking diverse. You don't have to talk about it, just do it. And I think that that can be replicated across so many areas in organizations, be it, mental health and workplace wellness and, diversity and inclusion, but also like creating environments that people actually want to be in. Because when you do have these particular cliques of people, and that's usually, as I've said before, it's, these are just my experiences. This is not pointing fingers and it's not naming and shaming, but just observing what has gone on and what continues to go on and what actually is detrimental to people's mental health. And I'm concerned for younger people going into these situations and these organizations, particularly when it comes to the public service. I think that there's so much that really needs to be done in that space. When you do have these organizations that aren't driven by board, like, well, not necessarily driven by boards and state stock markets and all the rest of it. Because money is obviously a huge driver in a private corporate organization. Whereas in the public service, it's like people like to create busy nonsense work to make them feel like they add value and that they are, there for a purpose, when so much of it is actually fucking nonsense. And there's a lot of it that is people peddling their own agenda. No one wants to make a decision. And what they end up doing is deferring everything to a minister's office because they don't want to be responsible for making a decision about anything. And so you're in this vicious cycle of like people not wanting to decide on things, work's getting done, everyone's really fucking busy, but it's like an echo chamber and it keeps going round and round in circles. You have these circle jerk conversations. No one wants to make a decision, but they all want to put their little like piece of the pie onto it too. And like I just think that, this kind of rhetoric around like, oh, but we can't decide. That's, you guys get paid the big dollars to do that. Like, is kind of bullshit in so many ways too, because, if you're wanting to set these KPIs and you're wanting to set these, reviews of people's performances, you're setting them up to fail when you're not actually giving them the autonomy to be able to do their actual fucking job. And then on top of that, when you have these, and as I've said, like, you know, these women who are targeting other women and making their lives incredibly difficult, you're literally destroying them in a place that they can't escape. And it doesn't matter how many fucking holidays you go on. It doesn't matter how many, you know, retreats or yoga classes or meditation classes or practitioners you go to, or therapy sessions that you end up going to. All of those actions are not going to change that environment that you're in. And the only way that these environments are going to change is if the heads of these organizations actually pull their finger out, realize that they are actually liable. Particularly, you know, I'm not sure if it's all of Australia, but it's definitely within New South Wales. You know, mental health, like you actually as a company, as a workplace, need to be providing a safe, not only physically safe, but psychologically safe environment for people to work in. And the longer you allow these little cliques of protected species, and that can either be women or men, you know, it goes both ways. But I do think that women can be particularly vicious, and particularly two-faced. Whereas, you know, yeah, like men are usually straight shooters, whereas women are particularly vicious and quite cruel. And so until the heads of organizations, until leadership are willing to take a stand against the rotten eggs that they know are in their organization, they know it. Like, this is the thing that pisses me off too. It's like, you know who the problem children are. You know why people leave. You know, and these people that you're protecting have a reputation. You're just too chicken shit to go through the process of actually going, you know what? Your behavior is not welcome here, because that behavior is, once you allow that, then other people witness that that's okay. And then that proliferates within an organization. And by that time, you know, even if you are getting new blood in, if you are getting new people in, you know, you're still allowing that behavior to happen. And so therefore, you are going to be constantly recruiting. You're going to be constantly trying to make things better instead of getting to the really root of the problem. And that is the issue. That's so much of the issue in so many organizations. And I think we're at that point in time where people are sick of the bullshit. You know, you can't use talking points and nonsense to get out of things anymore. People want truth. And the truth is something that so many of these companies are not willing to admit, because it means that they're actually liable. And, you know, I hate to say, but I think we're getting to a point where so much of this is being uncovered that you're not going to be able to get away with this sort of shit. And even if you do get away with it, you're not going to be able to attract people that actually want to work for you. You know, there's things like Glassdoor now where people can actually review the organization that they work for, and that can be anonymously or, you know, or whatever. And those platforms, people absolutely check them before they go and apply for a job. You know, your reputation is not going to be protected by the talking points that you say, and by the LinkedIn things that you put out there, and all this self congratulatory things about being inclusive and all this sort of thing, when you're really not inclusive, when you're still allowing these people to get away with this behavior. That is not inclusive at all. That is just turning a blind eye and having willful ignorance to what's going on. And after working to CEOs, like, they do get told what's going on. And even with the executive level trying to placate them and tell them what they think and all the rest of it. Like, the truth gets out there. And I think actions definitely speak louder than words in these sorts of cases, because when you do have this mass exodus of people and you're not able to attract talent, those things speak volumes, and things need to change. You can't be willfully ignorant to this anymore. It's not sustainable. It's not possible. You're not actually going to get the real answer out of your employees by putting out, these mental health apps and different things like that. It's just like surveys, which I've spoken about before. People if they don't feel safe enough to share what's going on, how the fuck do you think that they're going to feel safe enough to put their deepest, darkest secrets into these, surveys or these apps that you're giving them to put in their, their own emotional, like, processes of what they're going through and all that sort of thing. Like, it's very concerning about the amount of data that is being collected around people's mental health. And I've spoken about Freedom to Think by Susie Allegre. I've spoken about that before. It's an incredible book, and I highly recommend people reading it, because it talks about the human rights around so many things, but in particular data. And I'm just going to quote part of it. So in there, she says that selling mental health data is like auctioning the keys to our minds. And in this case, without our informed consent, it's hawking stolen property when the property in question is human dignity. It cannot be cured by a bigger font on the I agree button. Consent requires understanding and information, and consent requires choice. If even trusted public or charitable organizations are selling my mind where I can go get help and information to deal with my demons, selling this kind of information is effectively trafficking in mental states, and it puts public mental health at risk. When instead of opening up opportunities for people to get help to address their problem, it exploits and exacerbates them. And I mean, that is real food for thought, because so many companies think that, to fix their culture and to fix people's mental states and to fix all these things, we're just going to, we're going to roll out this app that you can, or this website that, or this whatever, that you can input your information and all the rest of it. But the question is, how is that information being used? How is that being used not only internally, but from the company that you're purchasing that program from? Like, where is that data going? How is that being used? Is it being sold? Is it being used for different purposes? This is literally part of the issue here. And it is about consent. And you can't be coercing people into participating in these programs when you can't even answer how that's being used. And I think so much of the go-to for a lot of these organizations is that they want just a quick fix. Everyone wants a Band-Aid. They all want a solution. The issue with that is, and the big issue is, that when you get to the point of you're only wanting a solution, you're stopping the process from actually happening in the middle. You're stopping that discussion. And it's in that discussion, in that to and from and that back and forth to try and understand what's going on, that's where you are going to formulate a solution. It's not rolling out some new program. It's not rolling out some new consultant coming in to tell you how to have hard conversations, or, Black Dog Institute coming in to inform you about mental health, which is all admirable. And yes, it ticks a box, but it doesn't actually change the dial, because what's not changing is the environment that people are having to endure every single day. And so, particularly when it comes to, I think, women, and I don't want to say that in a way of feminist type of way or anything like that, because I actually think that there's so many issues in so much of that too, because you can't just say, oh, we need to be championing females at the expense of younger males and things like that. Like there is, there's definitely a lot of nuance to these conversations. But I think with particularly younger women being targeted by older women and their lives being made miserable, I've just seen it too much. And I've had it happen to me. And that, like I've had it happen multiple times actually. And it hasn't always necessarily been just being young. I think part of it is that older women, particularly in management positions, feel threatened when things get questioned. And for the most part, men are usually more curious about that. They're usually more like, oh, okay, that's a really good point. And how can we include that? Whereas a lot of women are sort of like, I'm right and you're wrong. And that's just the way it is. Yeah. And like part of it is that a lot of these women are very good at covering up what's really going on. And it is that, kissing up and kicking down kind of approach where, upper management don't even realize a lot of the time what the issues are, because people are, one, too afraid to speak up because they know that the ramifications of doing that are so detrimental to their own mental well-being and their, everyday occurrence, that it's not worth it. And usually, more often than not, people will just leave. They won't try and even raise it because you can see that, as I said before, this behavior is allowed. So therefore, if you're coming in and having this experience that is awful, but everyone else just like allows it and think that that's okay, then you're kind of reading the room, right? And you're going, well, nothing changes if nothing changes. And clearly these people don't want to change anything, because even when things have been brought up, there's nothing that really changes. So what's the point? Like, I may as well just leave. I may as well find a place that is actually going to value my input and value the things that I can bring, instead of trying to keep me down and instead of trying to undermine my progress. And I think that that's, there's a lot to be said there. If we're wanting to have more women in leadership and we're wanting to have more women on boards, for the equality and for those numbers and things like that. And yes, quotas are not the answer either, but they do help to go some way to, it's a small kind of pity fuck, if you will, in a way of progressing into that, into a more equal approach to boards and leadership positions and a whole range of things. But also, I think part of the reason that a lot of women actually don't want to go into these into these, leadership positions and these board positions is from those same experiences from other women. I actually think that so much of that is like your experiences inform your choice. And so therefore you can't devoid your experiences from what that opportunity may or may not bring up, or what it may or may not put you as a target. And so if you've experienced that before, I think that, yeah, going and actually putting yourself forward for any sort of leadership or board positions. And I mean, I use these words leadership and board just in a very broad context. Like that could mean anything. It could just mean even going for a managerial position. Like even I know that when I had a team of people, at one point I like had a team member say to me, you know what, like I wouldn't have done this if they had offered it to me, because I see the way that you're being treated. And I think that those things are very telling. Like it's not that women don't want to put themselves forward for these positions. I think that they can see how other people are treated when they do go into those positions and be treated by other women. And so therefore they just opt out. They just bow out and go, you know what? I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to put myself through that. Like, what is the point? I will just go through the motions, be here, do my thing, and yeah, just keep my head down and keep quiet. And that in and of itself proliferates these cultures of silence. Like that's what happens. Yeah. I mean, the other thing is like I've also been doing a lot of reading. Adam Grant, I've, followed him on Instagram and things, but I've really deep dove into his books. And I think I mentioned before that I was reading Give and Take. And it's an incredible book about the dynamics of givers and takers. And we've all experienced that, be it in friendships, relationships, workplaces. But he predominantly looks at different people, around like venture capitalists and all that sort of thing, and how those people that are the givers are the ones that are actually seemingly more successful than those that are just takers. Um, and in part of that, he says, and I quote, "This is what I find most magnetic about successful givers. They get to the top without cutting others down, finding ways of expanding the pie that benefits themselves and the people around them. Whereas success as a zero-sum game in a group of takers, in groups of givers, it may be true that the whole is greater than the sum of all parts." And I think that so much of that is relevant in the context of what I've gone through today, in that, you know, there's so many people out there trying to cut other people down for their own self-preservation. And some of it is like the most nonsense self-preservation. And other times it's literally just cruel, like they're just cutting people down for the sake of it, like a sport. Um, and I don't say that lightly either, because honestly, from what I've witnessed and from the discussions that I've had with people over the years, um, you know, this whole like cutting people down kind of, it looked like sport to them. There was really no purpose for it. Well, there was no logical purpose for any of it. It was just, it was kind of how they operated, and people were just like, that's just how they are. But also, I mean, do we really want to be encouraging workplaces and environments that are so cutthroat that cutting other people down is how you get ahead? Like, that's just fucking awful. Surely we've moved past that. Like, it's not the gecko days of years gone by. It's not the 80s. It's not this, like things have progressed. And I think workplaces and the way that women treat other women really need to fucking progress, because if we don't do it, if people don't come to the party, if it's not looked at, you know, workplaces and the companies that have been thriving in the past are not going to, they're just not going to survive. They're really not going to survive. Um, Companies that are not taking the psychological safety of people seriously and beyond just tokenistic morning teas and little talks and things like that. And I must add, for the most part, a lot of these activities that get scheduled in to tick the box to be like, look, aren't we so great? We're caring about people's psychological safety and everything. Most of the time, they're over lunchtime, or you've got to try and squeeze it in amongst other work. And half the time, if you're turning up to those things, people are looking at you being like, well, if you've got time to turn up to this, you obviously don't have enough work to do. Like, that's the sentiment around so many of these organizations. So I think, it's doing it in a way that shows that taking the time out to do these activities is actually okay. And mandating it is not the answer, but you also need to have these safer environments where people aren't being targeted, where then they're allowed to provide ideas and observations and provide input. I mean, that's what you fucking pay people for, right? You pay them and you employ them for their expertise, or even if they're a generalist, like for their opinion. I mean, and their perspective on things. Like, people are able to provide insights and perspectives that you as a leader probably don't have. And until you're willing to put your ego at the door and actually allow people the space and, you know, environments for them to share what's going on for them to share their views and actually help improve things, then you may as well walk into every fucking meeting, tell everyone what you think, and then walk out again and not even bother like going around the table, because there's no point if you're not going to listen. I can't remember if it was in one of Adam Grant's books, but I did read somewhere that it was probably one of the many business books that I've read and things. But it's a very telling thing of a leader when they can walk into a room or they walk into a meeting and allow everyone at the table to have their input before they provide their perspective. And not only is that allowing people to feel safe in the environment, but it's also allowing you as a leader to gain different perspectives and actually process some of that, because maybe someone in there might change your mind about how you've been thinking about a particular topic or project or whatever it is that you're meeting about. And there's definitely something to be said about that. And I think that we need some more action to be taken. We need some more listening to happen. And we also need to really get to the belly of the issue when it comes to cultures, and women need to be fucking nicer to women. That's mic drop right there. So anyway, I hope that you have enjoyed this week. I'm also opening up my books to one-on-one holistic mentoring for people who are dealing in toxic workplaces. And I'm doing this because I spent years going to different practitioners. I tried everything under the sun that you can possibly even think of. And I know that a lot of it does help, but the difference is that when you are working with someone who doesn't have that lived experience, they really can't comprehend what you're really going through. And so I do this in trying to help people to not feel so alone in their process of being in a shitty fucking job and not feeling like there's any way out and that no one's going to change anything. I mean, ultimately, I would like to be going into organizations and helping to shift culture and show CEOs and executives how to really, listen to their people and repair those relationships that have been seemingly broken. Because what happens is when you are creating these cultures of silence by allowing bad behavior, then no one's really going to tell you what's going on. And so sometimes you do need a buffer to hear what's going on, but in a very confidential way, because doing surveys and things like that is not, people don't feel safe enough to do that. But anyway, so initially I will be, I'm available for one-on-one holistic mentoring for toxic workplaces, where we can work through what's going on for you. We can try and provide some perspective onto things. And also I can give you some insights into the things and the ways that I, just some of the tools that I used to kind of help wade through a lot of the bullshit that I dealt with for quite a period of time. And if you are going through that, like, I really see you. I really do. And even if you aren't in a position to engage someone for that, like, this podcast will always be free, and I actually don't want to have any ads on it or anything like that, because I feel like like it deters from the experience. I don't like listening to podcasts with ads. So, but yeah, if you do feel like you need support or you would be interested, please don't hesitate to reach out. All the links will be in the show notes, but equally, you can DM me through Instagram. It's at Intuitively Create, or on the podcast Instagram, which is Not Compliant Enough. And yeah, I hope to help people through their situations, because I know how incredibly lonely it can be, and HR are not your friend, and sometimes your colleagues are not your friends, because they're in their own self-preservation mode. So to have someone to just be a soundboard, to be your own little cheerleader in the corner, I'm here and available. So please reach out. And regardless, I hope that you have an incredible week, and I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Thanks for listening.